It may be hard to believe for those of us born in the digital age, when every embarrassing moment can potentially be uploaded to YouTube for posterity. But an estimated 70% of all films from the silent era are thought to be lost. Of the silent film directors whose works have largely vanished, perhaps the most intriguing, at least for me, is the German director Kai Winkelmann. Although influential in his own era, he has since been largely forgotten, for reasons which I believe will become readily apparent if you read further in this article. Winkelmann was born on September 18th, 1887 in Offenbach, Maine, the son of a butcher. He reportedly found the family business very distasteful and did not get along well with his father, who drank heavily. After serving on the Russian front in World War I, a time of Winkelmann's life which left him permanently traumatized, Winkelmann married a certain Greta Schultz, a nurse whom he had met at a veterans hospital. He moved with her to her home city of Vienna, Austria, where he began making films for the pioneering producer Joe May. Winkelmann created many moderately successful films while working for May, several of which survive in whole or in part. But by far his most successful work was the Lord Lister serial. The Lister series, based on a series of pulp stories concerning a gentleman thief named Lord Lister, who goes by the nom de guerre Raffles in the criminal underworld, consists of 6 episodes, each about 1 hour in length. The films bear a somewhat superficial resemblance to their source material. In the original novels, as in the first 2 episodes of the Lister serial, Lord Lister is a somewhat sympathetic Robin Hood-like figure, a la Arsène Lupin, who rarely commits any particularly egregious misdeeds. In Winkelmann's Lister serials, however, he became a much more sinister figure, a seemingly omnipotent mastermind of crime who is not above rape and mass murder. In the serial, as in the novels, Lord Lister is pursued by a Scotland Yard detective named Baxter. In the early installments of the serial, Baxter is portrayed as a figure of fun, an incompetent drunkard who is always outwitted by the master thief. But in the later episodes, Baxter becomes a tragic figure, an honest lawman who is helpless to prevent the atrocities of his implacable persecutor, Lord Lister. Although Lister was played by several different actors, the idea being that his true face was unknown, Detective Baxter was always played by Winkelmann's friend and confidant, actor Olaf Schneider. Olaf became close friends with Winkelmann shortly after the latter began working with Joe May. The two could not be any more different in appearance or in temperament. Schneider was healthy, muscular, and a lover of fast cars and boxing, while Winkelmann was a recluse and often in poor health. Nevertheless, the two shared a close relationship, perhaps finding common ground over the tragedies in their respective pasts. Winkelmann had had an abusive childhood and was left mentally scarred by his service in the First World War, while Schneider's wife had committed suicide in 1918, leaving him to raise their infant daughter alone. The contents of the first 5 Lister films, insofar as they can safely be reconstructed at all, only one of them survives, and even then only in an incomplete print. They are as follows. Number 1. Lister tritt ein. Enter Lister. The screenplay of this first episode was written by none other than legendary director-screenwriter Fritz Lang. In this installment, Lister, who is living under the assumed name Lord William Aberdeen, manages to steal a valuable painting during an art exhibition. The bumbling Detective Baxter eventually manages to arrest Lister, but the latter escapes, switching identities with the guard in a clever ruse. A spectacular chase scene ensues, during which Lister, of course, escapes. Number 2. Lister schlägt zurück. Lister strikes back. The film opens with an elaborate scene where Lister steals the pearl necklace off of a duchess's neck at the opera house. Shortly thereafter, Lister boldly announces his next crime via a newspaper advertisement. He will steal the family jewels of Lord Wilmore at X hour. Baxter and his fellow policemen stand guard at Lord Wilmore's side at his mansion, waiting for Lister to appear, but he never does. Just when he's about to dismiss the incident as a hoax, Baxter hears muffled cries and discovers the real Lord Wilmore bound and gagged in a wardrobe. Lister had been impersonating him the entire night, and the real jewels had already been replicated with identical duplicates. Baxter realized that the mansion is rigged to explode and barely escapes with his life. This is the only surviving Lister film. Number 3. Lister in America. Detective Baxter receives a tip that Lister is hiding in the United States. Baxter boards an ocean liner, but halfway across the Atlantic, the voyage begins to go horribly awry. The passengers are falling mysteriously ill. It seems that Lister has planted plague-infested rats on board, presumably in an attempt to assassinate Baxter. Upon his arrival in New York, Baxter is swiftly arrested for a series of murders that Lister committed, and a local judge, Lister in disguise, sentences him to death by hanging. Baxter makes a desperate escape through the sewer system and emerges into the night air, where he is greeted with the sight of Lister taunting him from a rooftop. He is wearing his iconic costume, a black cloak, black gloves, and a black executioner's mask. Lister mockingly crosses and extends his wrists, as if daring Baxter to arrest him. Number 4. Das Todliche Parfum. The Deadly Perfume. Detective Baxter investigates a series of grisly murders. Someone has been replacing department store perfume with sulfuric acid, resulting in dozens of deaths and disfigurements. In order to uncover the truth, Baxter forms an alliance with a young woman who claims to have been Lord Lister's lover. Despite being a married man, Baxter soon begins to succumb to her charms as well. The film ends with a shocking scene. Due to the machinations of Lister, Baxter is forced to allow the young woman to be run over by a train in order to avert an accident that would kill hundreds of people. Number 5. Die schreiende Leiche. The Screaming Corpse. Little is known about the contents of this particular film, as contemporary reviews contain little bit exclamations of disapproval. It's known to chronicle Baxter's descent into alcoholism and depression after his repeated failures to capture Lister. The plot reportedly involved a deadly fire at an opera house and a surreal scene wherein Lister wears a man's flesh as a mask. Despite, or perhaps because of, their often morbid content, the films were quite popular with the contemporary viewing public. One might consider them the Saw of their day. As you might have guessed, the increasing darkness of Winckelmann's films was accompanied by a corresponding crisis in his personal life. The affair between Winckelmann's wife Greta and his closest friend, Olaf Schneider. Winkleman seems to have known of the affair and tactically accepted it, although eventually, this seems to have taken a considerable toll on his already fragile psyche. In a letter to his cousin, dated October 13th, 1923, Winkleman writes,
"And why shouldn't she prefer him? A man like him can offer her what I, with my frail body and lacerated soul, could never hope to give her. My dark muse has seized control of my life. I'm powerless to do anything but obey its commands."
This state of affairs continued for some time before an unthinkable tragedy put an end to both the Lord Lister serial and Winkleman's partnership with Schneider, at least for the time being. In December of 1923, Winkleman was away on business in Frankfurt, having left his 18-month-old son alone with his wife. The live-in housekeeper was away visiting her sister. According to the report that a distraught Greta later gave the police, she and Schneider were making love in the bedroom when suddenly she heard a loud thud from the child's room. Her son had evidently climbed out of his crib, breaking his neck. Naturally, this created a gigantic scandal, and no one was particularly surprised when Greta disappeared one day, presumably to start a new life under an assumed name. As for Schneider, he emigrated soon thereafter to the United States, where he dropped out of the public eye. Despite the horrendous personal tragedies that had befallen him, Winkleman held up as well as could be imagined under the circumstances. Although he had been a doting father, at least when he was not distracted by his filmmaking career, he managed to bear his grief with a certain quiet dignity, even founding his own film company a few months later. Winkleman's studio was relatively successful at first, turning out several lucrative, if unremarkable, films. A few years after his son's death, however, strange rumors began circulating around Winkleman. It was said that he had fired most of his staff and spent his days wandering around his empty, decrepit Filmstadt. In an interview with the Vossische Zeitung, dating to 6 months before his death, Winkleman claimed that he had fully forgiven Schneider and, rather surprisingly, had been corresponding with him and planned for them to make a film together. To the surprise and later dismay of the viewing public, a final installment of the Lord Lister saga, entitled Lister's Rache, Lister's Revenge, was released in 1927. Lister's Rache was screened in only a few theaters before being permanently withdrawn from circulation. The film, only 40 minutes long, was much more surreal and expressionistic than any previous installment in the series, and much more unsettling. Contemporary accounts, though doubtless exaggerated, mention fainting fits and worse at advanced screenings of the film. According to contemporary newspaper reports, the film begins with an inner title explaining that Detective Baxter has lost his job with Scotland Yard and had been abandoned by his family. Baxter is shown in a dirty, disordered apartment room, sitting at a writing desk. There's no other furniture around him. Baxter is writing a note whose contents we do not see, and weeping all the while. He's surrounded by empty beer bottles, and his appearance is unkempt and disheveled. The crying scene continues for an uncomfortably long time, after which Baxter leaves his apartment and wanders through the streets of London. The city is represented by a series of surreal matte paintings, reportedly very much in the style of Das Kabinett des Dr. Caligari, full of absurd angles that would be impossible in reality. Sinister shapes can be discerned in the background: hanged bodies, weeping, disfigured faces, etc. Detective Baxter finally pauses in the middle of a tall bridge, contemplating the rough waters and jagged rocks below. It's clear that he's considering suicide. Suddenly, a dark shape materializes at the other end of the bridge. It's Lister, wearing his usual executioner's hood and cloak.
Jump!
Lister shouts, via an intertitle of course. And Baxter, after a moment's pause, manages to gather his resolve and chase after his nemesis. After a brief chase scene, Lister leaps into an enormous sinkhole, Baxter following close behind. In the next scene, the detective finds himself in an enormous cavern, presumably the master criminal's base of operations. It becomes clear that the cavern is filled with furniture, dining table with chairs, a wardrobe, wash basin, even a bookcase. Baxter cautiously approaches the table, soon realizing to his horror that all of the furniture appears to be made of human bone. In the center of the cavern is an enormous pile of human body parts, casually stacked together like a compost heap. Baxter recoils in horror and attempts to run back to the entrance of the cavern, but it's too late. Lister, with two other masked men on either side of him, is swiftly approaching, carrying an axe. We see their shadows on the wall of the cave encroach on the detectives, finally engulfing it completely. The scene shifts yet again. Detective Baxter showed inside a damp dungeon of sorts, hands and feet manacled to the wall. He's bruised and bloodied. A large metal door swings open, and Lister reappears, still accompanied by his two masked henchmen. One of said henchmen is carrying a struggling, wriggling form, a blindfolded little girl around 10 years of age. Lister tells Baxter,
"Now you and your daughter will be reunited, just as you wished."
With that, the two masked thugs hold the screaming and kicking little girl down on the ground, while Lister withdraws a butcher knife from somewhere within his cloak and calmly, methodically slashes her throat. The two masked henchmen then place the dying little girl opposite the distraught Detective Baxter. Blood is oozing from her mouth and throat, but she is still breathing slightly. Lister declares,
"Leave him to his fate."
And the three masked men exit the room, leaving Baxter to watch helplessly as his daughter breathes her last. An inner title announces that 3 weeks have passed, and Baxter is still chained where Lord Lister left him. His clothes are ragged, his skin is covered in bruises and blisters, and his eyes have a wild, haunted look. Across from him is the corpse of his daughter, bloated and blackened. The iron door slowly creeps open, and Lord Lister reappears, once again shadowed by his two masked accomplices. This time, he is carrying what appears to be a burlap sack. The two henchmen unchain Baxter. He attempts to strangle Lister, but in his pathetically weakened state, he is easily restrained. Lord Lister slowly pulls an object from the sack. It's a long-haired, human head still dripping blood.
"Kiss your wife,"
Lister exclaims. A horrified Baxter refuses, but the henchmen punch him into submission and restrain his arms. Lister forces the severed head's lips against Baxter's, the latter retching all the while. Baxter is then returned to his restraints, and the two accomplices proceed to savagely beat him with nail-studded wooden planks while Lister looks on. Lord Lister motions for his men to stop the beating, and Baxter looks up with dying eyes at his tormentor, lying in a pool of his own blood.
"You realize now why you've never managed to catch me? Why you never could have won?"
Lister says. Lord Lister begins to peel off his hood and turns around to face the camera directly. We see his true face for the first time, or rather, the space where one should be. For Lister does not possess one at all. His face is a blank wall of flesh with nothing at all to mark it as human except a gaping black mouth.
I am lost,
He says, drifting closer and closer towards the camera as if threatening to break through it. Lord Lister's jaw opens wider and wider, far wider than should be humanly possible. It reaches down almost to his waist, as if threatening to engulf the audience and all the world. And with that image, the film abruptly ends. As mentioned above, Lister's Rache was a resounding failure with audiences at advanced screenings, and it was quickly pulled from most theaters. Evidently, the film was too much, even for a movie-going public that had made Winkleman a wealthy man for his earlier forays into aestheticized violence. Audiences had found the film's gore effects to be disturbingly convincing, so convincing in fact that many suspected that they were not effects at all, and a warrant was soon issued for Winkleman's arrest. After the police had searched in vain for Winkleman at his home, a fire was reported at his downtown film studio. Several hours later, Winkleman's body, having been pulled from the smoldering ruins of his Filmstadt, was identified using his fingerprints. Though his garments were badly burned, he appeared to have been dressed in black. The bodies of Olaf Schneider, his 10-year-old daughter, and his former lover Greta Winkleman were never recovered. Like most of Winkleman's films, Lister's Rache has vanished almost without a trace. Some of the copies were lost in fires, an unfortunately very common occurrence, as early film stock was highly flammable, while others were deliberately destroyed. There's an interesting, though almost certainly apocryphal anecdote in Christian Eichheim's modern Schaumarschen aus der Stummfilmzeit about a rediscovered copy of Lister's Rache, which bears repeating here, if only for its dramatic interest. In 1974, so the story goes, Peter Fleischer, an Austrian film collector, acquired a copy of the film at an auction. After viewing the film on his private projector, he began to experience headaches, nausea, and finally hallucinations. He reported seeing a figure in a black cloak out of the corner of his eye, but the figure would vanish as soon as he turned his head. At first, this figure would appear to be far away, but it seemed to come closer over time. Eventually, Fleischer began to suffer from insomnia. The figure would stand over his bed at night, but disappear as soon as the light switch was turned on. Every appearance of this figure would cause a feeling of intense despair and dread in Fleischer. After several weeks of agony, Fleischer finally burnt the film reel in his fireplace. The hallucinations ended, but an inexplicable smell of charred flesh lingered over the chimney. The same book also offers a rather strange urban legend concerning an alleged curse that hung over the life of Kai Winkleman. While serving on the Russian front during World War I, so the story goes, a dying prisoner of Romani descent who had been captured after a particularly bloody skirmish cast the evil eye on the young lieutenant.
The weight of the deaths you have caused will follow you like a cloud,
the man is reported to have said. Perhaps this was the Dark Muse Winkleman spoke of in his letters. Bears mentioning here that Winkleman's sketchbook from his stay at the Veterans Hospital contains numerous line drawings of a faceless, cloaked figure. Regardless of what you think of the supernatural, ask yourself this: who is more real, Hamlet or Shakespeare, Dickens or Oliver Twist, Charles Foster Kane, or Orson Welles. Some fictional characters have more life in them than you or I. Children are insane. This is an unspoken truth, a silent agreement among the older and wiser. Children see things that adults can't or won't, and we laugh it off and tell them everything's all right. There's nothing there. It's not real. And when they get a little older, they'll agree with us. Ghosties and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night exist no longer in the adult world. Children are insane, but they grow out of it. I'm not ashamed to admit that I still haven't grown out of one of my ridiculous childhood fears. Perhaps maybe I feel that it's still justified all these years later. I haven't outgrown it. Merely pushed it to the back of my mind, where it still manifests in a dream now and then. You see, my parents died in a car accident when I was 3 years old. My only memories of them are static. Mom and Dad reduced to the black and white photographs on my grandparents' hearth. It doesn't bother me to talk about it because I was far too young to mourn their passing. But I've always been curious to know what they were like, what kind of people they were. For reasons that I didn't understand at the time, my grandparents refused to talk about them except at length. It was painful for them in a way I'll never know. So after my parents died, my grandparents were not the natural choice, but the only one. My grandma didn't have mom until she was 47 years old, and this was after suffering through 3 failed pregnancies. So they only had one child, my mother, and by the time of the accident, Grandma was 76 and Granddad 78. I had one uncle on my dad's side, but he was an alcoholic and wouldn't be able to take care of a 3-year-old kid. So off I went to my grandparents' house, despite the fact that both of them were way too old to be watching after a toddler. The older I got, the more I realized that Sunday mornings were my own personal hell. Granddad was religious and insisted that Grandma and I go to church with him every week, even though Grandma was about the least religious person I've ever known. She couldn't care less about God and heaven and Satan and hell, and influenced me in more ways than Granddad did, even though he tried his damnedest to get me to pay attention to him. Each morning at breakfast, he'd assault me with Bible verses, and each evening was dedicated to lecturing me on the possibility of eternal punishment in the lake of fire. It's also worth mentioning that he wasn't exactly a saint himself. He was a lawyer in his younger years and had helped plenty of terrible people escape jail time and state prison. Maybe he was trying to make up for it in his own way, but me and Grandma both suffered for it. The church that I saw each Sunday for the first few years of my life was a rickety old thing smack in the middle of nowhere. It was back on a hill, surrounded by a field of sunflowers during the summer and a barren stretch of land during the other 3 seasons of the year. I'm sure it probably sounds charming to you, but the floor creaked like holy hell, and the walls would groan and shudder like the whole place was about to go up in a tornado. This would occur on a perfectly normal, breezeless day, and had all the children of the congregation convinced that the building was haunted. I think the worst part was the window. Yes, there was only one window in the entire building, and it was a crooked, amateurish, stained glass rendition of Jesus Christ on the cross. This scene was bizarrely graphic, with the gaunt face of Christ turned to heaven, eyes rolled skyward, and the Roman soldiers' hammers poised mid-strike to drive nails into his hands. Bright red blood was shown squirting from the wounds. For the most part, no worse than anything you might see in any Christian church anywhere in the world. But the crude depiction and the cherry-colored blood made the window look exceptionally eerie, especially to a vulnerable, scrawny kid of 10 with an overactive imagination. When the sun caught the window on any summer morning, Jesus in his bloody hands seemed to glow and pulse with unholy light. That pale face lurked in my mind when I closed my eyes and those rivulets of blood gleamed in my nightmares. I never wanted to be alone in that church, not under the eyes of stained glass Jesus. Unfortunately for me, my fears were soon to be realized. A Sunday afternoon, after my grandparents and I had returned home from service, I realized that I'd left my dad's lucky rabbit foot on the pew back at church. The rabbit foot was just a silly thing that my father had carried with him on his keychain back when he was alive. It was one of the few things recovered from the crash that was still intact. When I was 6 years old, Grandma gave it to me. I saw the rabbit's foot as a way to connect with Dad, even though I never got the chance to know him. So naturally, I panicked. I wanted Grandma to go with me to get it, but she was worn out from the walk to church and back and told me I was old enough to go on my own. It wasn't much of a walk for a young boy like me, she said, but I kept seeing stained glass Jesus and his bright red blood, and that cold fear crept up in my mind as if I were really there, standing before him. I didn't want Granddad to go, so I finally relented. I took a long time walking alongside the road, hands jammed in my pockets, wanting to prolong my inevitable meeting with stained glass Jesus Christ as much as possible. Tall sunflowers swayed in the warm breeze like rippling ocean waves, and when I walked past them, they seemed to bend their heads and bow at my feet. "Good luck," they seemed to say. "Good luck and goodbye." As eerie as the church was on any normal day, when it was empty, it was the stuff of nightmares. I opened the front door without stepping inside and stared into darkness. The entrance was a great yawning mouth, ragged velvet rug, its tongue, and jagged wooden steps its teeth. I repressed my fear as best I could and took the stairs up into the church, careful to leave the front door open in case I needed to make a hasty exit. The sanctuary seemed to swallow all light, and to my 10-year-old self, the room was too large and simultaneously claustrophobic. I approached the pew where me and my grandparents had been sitting, the floorboards groaning with each step. And there was the rabbit's foot, just out of reach. I leaned in to grab it when I felt a presence in the room with me. You know the feeling when somebody is watching you, even if you're alone. It was like that, except I wasn't alone, and I knew I wasn't alone. Stained glass Jesus would be watching me if I turned around. I didn't want to turn around, but the pews were pushed up next to the wall, and the only way to get out was to go back the way I'd came. So I turned back around and saw stained glass Jesus looking at me, even though I tried my hardest not to look at him. Here he was, all pale skin and wide eyes and bloody hands, and we were completely alone. Both of my hands were gripped around the rabbit's foot like it was a life preserver in the middle of a raging storm. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. And then Jesus moaned. Light pulsed beyond the window, making him glow bright and unholy, and with each flicker the scene shifted. The Roman soldier's hammer swung back and forth, driving the nails deeper into his hands, blood spraying on impact. He moaned, and his eyes rolled in their sockets before focusing on me. That crude, gaunt face turned to me in the confines of colorful glass as he opened his mouth and said,
"Your parents burn in hell."
Suddenly, I could move again. I was running out of the sanctuary and out of the church and into the blinding light of a summer afternoon before I was fully able to comprehend what had happened. As soon as my feet hit the dirt path outside of church, the door slammed shut and it was over. I ran home without stopping. That evening, Grandma asked me if something was wrong. I never told her what I saw. As fate would have it, I never had to go back to the church with the stained glass Jesus. That night, my granddad died in his sleep. Nobody was exactly surprised. He was an old man, after all. After the funeral, me and Grandma packed up and moved closer to town. The rest of my childhood was relatively normal, and I'm grateful for it. My grandma died, time passed, and I grew up. I've tried to rationalize the stained glass Jesus many times over the years. Perhaps it was a combination of a child's imagination, coupled with both curiosity and fear over my parents. I've tried to tell myself that, but to this day I can't really accept it. I don't think I'll ever know. On summer evenings, when the sunlight catches just right between the trees, I'll think of that old church so many years ago. And when I think of the church, I know for a fact that when I close my eyes that night, I'll see stained glass Jesus and his gaunt face and skyward eyes and bloody hands, and I'll hear his voice just like I'm 10 years old again. Your parents burn in hell. Let me introduce my friend, Meek. He sat at his computer, tongue licking his upper and lower lips in anticipation. A long-nailed, fat, and grimy index finger clicked on the mouse at a dizzying pace. An observer might have thought there was an insane miniature tap dancer somewhere underneath the plies of filth that surrounded the man. However, no tap dancer could effectively practice their talent in this cramped and deplorable dwelling. The apartment smelled old. Old food, old clothes, old sweat, and old urine. Older keepsakes from a time when Meek was a different man than the behemoth sitting behind the computer now, peeked through the places where the trash didn't take over. A narrow path wound its way around the dwelling, taking Meek to the vital places he needed to go when life interrupted. A path to the bathroom that was rarely used anymore, and another that forked 30 degrees to the apartment entrance. Others led to the kitchen and what might have once resembled the dining room. Another path ended abruptly in front of the bedroom's entrance, a ramp of filth almost reaching the smoke alarm above the door frame. The high amount of detritus that formed those paths were monuments showing the sloth of the recent past, an involuntary tale from the ground up. Most of the bottoms of them were newspapers he used, back when caring seemed to still be second nature to soak up the vomit and spilled beer. After the insulating layers of refuse began to accumulate above them, however, the carpet became passé to his thoughts. An empty and flattened tampon box, whose corner jutted out from one of the disgusting hillocks near his computer, caught the corner of his eye. His wife, Marie, had left him about a year or more ago, but he barely remembered what she looked like. Even the dust and grime-covered picture lying face up near the monitor offered a view of a woman he didn't really remember knowing. She took their infant daughter, Chrissy? Christy? Krista? With her, as it became clear that Meek was quite incapable of anything besides playing his online game. He suddenly kicked the small amount of pizza boxes under his desk in frustration as his main game character fell to his demise off a ravine and into the pixelated lava below. The group he was running this dungeon with would undoubtedly boot him out of the group for his failure to keep up. He kicked the mound again, his long, yellow, big toenail piercing a hole through the box and into what he perceived to be the wall beyond. The pain barely registered at first due to Meek seeking that his internet connection had been terminated. He stomped his other foot into the moist and brown-colored spot on the floor to his left. A pungent smell that he had all but become immune to ran through his nostrils. He glanced at his fractured toenail, now resembling the misshapen tip of a bloodied spear. He grabbed the foot in pain and cursed the monitor before him, his game character a skeleton at the bottom of a molten orange doom. He had worked hard to get his game character to this point. Now this. Did he cut into the coaxial cable that supplied his internet access with his toenail? Or did he kick something else?
Bald-headed Christ fuck!
He shouted to the screen before him, a middle finger echoing what the mountains of garbage near him wouldn't let his voice do. He quickly stood, the crusty and stained seat cushion briefly sticking to his rear and bringing the chair up and then down with a plastic wheel bang. Trying to think quickly for a solution to his connectivity problem, he made his way along the kitchen path, slowly limping to the telephone. He was surprised at how much he had been sweating. Was the AC broken too? He silently thanked his dead mother for the trust fund that she had left to him that sustained his living these past few years. He would call the landlady after the cable company. He became lightheaded as his overweight frame limped among the refuse and vomited into an empty cereal box before entering the kitchen. Grabbing a dusty and half-full beer off of what must have been the dining room table, he drank, expelling the acidic taste from his mouth. He dry-heaved from the taste of the old beer, thankful that the taste of puke no longer lingered. He hadn't used the phone in ages. No need to, really. He used both hands to claw through some hamburger wrappers and matted paper towels to about where he estimated the phone to be. Several cockroaches scampered away at his touch, their surreptitious duties temporarily put on hiatus. He was correct in his assumption of where the phone should be. He was incorrect by thinking the phone was still there, however. He faintly remembered Marie saying how the phone's ringer woke up the baby at night. Since they could only afford a one-bedroom place at the time, the kid had to sleep in the living room, and since they both had cell phones at the time, the home phone was redundant. So, did she move it? Put it away? Throw it out, perhaps?
Oh, fuck me,
he said, as he picked a small itchy brown piece of crust from the back of his leg, clawing at the skin underneath. His toe was bleeding worse now. The toenail, much worse than he had thought, as he examined it in the brighter light of the kitchen. The nail cracked vertically all the way down, apparently breaking beneath the skin as well. His toe was easily twice the size it had been before his gimpy trek to the kitchen, a sickly wetting of purple and yellow. Meek didn't know the first place to look if Marie put it away somewhere, and quite frankly, he didn't feel like digging through more mounds to look. Another option was the bedroom. There was a landline connection in there. Maybe it was buried somewhere in there. His desire to get back to his game, coupled with his throbbing foot, prodded him to go back and look. He wobbled along the bedroom path straight down the hallway, the carpet he trod on making sickening wet sounds. He paused for a glance into the bathroom he stopped using months ago. A brown conical shape of a solid brown and green substance protruded from the grimy toilet. He could see several flies tending to their young among the shape, buzzing with parental defense as they sensed Meek's presence. Matted balls of toilet paper stood knee-high, occasionally broken by the mouths of empty beer bottles. The bottle tops almost looked like brown mouths, drowning in a sea of disgust. Smears and handprints of a darker color lined the tiled walls. A picture hung by the entrance of the bathroom. Meek and Marie standing in front of the lake at Epcot Center. The baby was nestled in Meek's arms, the peaceful shroud of sleep evident on her face as her happy father kissed her forehead.
Was that taken before or after the wedding?
He thought. He remembered that day, the baby cooing as the boat made its way through the tunnels in the Mexican section of the park. He had no idea why, but he also remembered Marie giving him a light but tender kiss on his neck as the boat sloshed its way through the artificial passages. He made his way toward the bedroom entrance, having to limp wade through trash that he didn't remember making. Glancing behind him, he noticed that he left a red trail as his foot dragged behind him. Clearing the way to the door took longer than he had thought. There were several large boxes hiding beneath the garbage that were heavier than he expected, their contents unimportant as the longing of getting back to his game took precedence over all else. They were stacked high as well, almost reaching where the door met the frame. Throwing the last box behind him down the hallway with a grunt, he grabbed the doorknob and tried to open the bedroom door. It was locked. After several minutes of determination, a few pulls from his obese frame, and many curses of frustration, the door gave way, splintering the frame and showering Meek's forearm with wooden debris. The room was dark, cool, and surprisingly clean. The light shone from the hallway behind him, exposing the motes of dust that chaotically danced at the door being thrust open. Had he really not come in here at all over that year or two? The carpet was the perfect beige it was when his family moved in a few years ago. The pictures that Marie picked out still hung around the room. Parisian beatnik monstrosities that Meek still gave a disdainful glance to. She insisted that since there were no windows in the room, she would make it as sunny as possible. The bed was made as well, the dark brown comforter looking eerily the same color as the putrescent contents of the bathroom he glanced at minutes before. The phone was on the nightstand, on the side that Meek used to sleep on during cheerier times. With a sigh of relief that any heroin user could relate to after finally getting a reclusive fix, he limped over to the phone. One foot left a bloody streak, and the other left brown footprints on the unmarked carpet. Sitting down on the bed, he picked up the phone's receiver and started to dial when he noticed the square-shaped thing in the corner. Since he didn't think to turn the light on when he came in, and the hallway's light didn't reach the corner, he couldn't make out what it was. He gave his toe a rub, hand coming back bloody, and winced in pain as the dread of realization crept up on him. There was no dial tone. This could mean only one thing. Marie had canceled the service at some point without telling him, or more likely, he didn't pay the bill after she left. He couldn't remember. Grabbing the phone in frustration, he threw it in the direction of the square-shaped thing, cursing. He was getting very lightheaded now, the coolness of the room doing little to alleviate the sweat drenching his balding, fleshy head. He stood and hobbled over to the square thing in the corner. As he came up beside it, he grabbed the edge of it and winced in pain, his foot feeling as if it was on fire. He looked into the square thing, now finally realizing what it was. Not just because of its physical shape, as much as its contents. The long, decayed corpse of an infant lay in the center of the playpen. The skin almost resembled one of those purplish super hot peppers he used to see at the grocery store, making bizarre spiral patterns along the top of the skull. The infant had a permanent scream on its wrinkled and deformed face, as though it was seeing something horrible before its death. That horrible thing must have been loneliness, Meek thought as he glanced at his daughter. That thought was quickly dashed, however, as he noticed another figure sitting upright in the darker corner beyond the crib. Marie's eyeless face pointed to the ceiling in a look of pain, as if she had died crying. One hand still rested on the corner of the playpen, the other pulling down the shirt where her breast had been. She must have given the infant,
Christina, that was her name,
one last meal before she herself had expired. Cursing in worried anticipation, he picked up the phone. It was thankfully still in one piece with the cord from the wall still attached to it, and hobbled to the bedroom door, deciding he would try the kitchen's phone receptacle, now out of a feverish desperation. As he made his way through the door frame, he immediately saw a problem. The heavy boxes that he had thrown behind him in a frenzy moments before now made a heavy wall that merged with the garbage piles. He could see a portion of his computer monitor beyond, a bubbly orange haze through cardboard and refuse. His foot throbbed and his chest suddenly contorted in pain as self-preservation began to take hold of his fevered body. Dropping the phone, he fell to his hands and knees and crawled towards the barricade. The first box before him wasn't so bad to move, but the next was impossible, positioned as he was, and he slumped over it. He sensed a cockroach that he must have only partially killed with his weight tickle the side of his torso.
Just a rest.
He mumbled.
The kitchen is just around the corner. So close. I'll have my internet back within the hour. Just one phone call,
he thought, longingly looking at his computer screen through the cardboard and refuse cracks. His heart finally took his frustration, his toe pain, and him along with it. Hi. No, you're not late at all. Please, come in. Say, don't I know you from somewhere? You're one of those pretty famous reporters, right? You seem really familiar. Can I get you some tea or coffee, or would you rather get on with the interview? Sorry, I don't know how this works. I've never been interviewed before. I pretty much shut myself off from the press after those kids went missing. I didn't need that kind of attention. I suppose I'll start my story by setting the scene. The village of Tir Gulwyn is pretty quiet nowadays. Wasn't always so. Back in the 90s, the mayor was given a government grant to build a new school which would cater for all the small towns and hamlets in the surrounding valleys. I was fresh out of university back then, just finished my training to become a teacher, and eager to start my first professional job, so I was thrilled to be offered a place at the Tir Gulwyn Infant School. I could finally prove myself by doing something I loved. The dolls changed all that. A thick fog had rolled over the mountains and was dribbling down into Gulwyn Valley, clinging to the top of the lake and probing at the town with slim tendrils carried on a light winter breeze. The school bus had already arrived, and the children were lining up to go inside, shivering in their anoraks and school jumpers. I skimmed the register and noted that all were present, except for a 5-year-old boy called Gavin Lewis. His photograph, a gap-toothed boy with straw-colored hair, grinned up at me from the paper. Reassuring myself that attendance could not always be perfect, I ushered my class indoors, and shooting one last hopeful glance out into the white-tinged street beyond the railings, shut the door behind me. My first lessons went well. An intro session to allow the kids to settle in and make friends on their first day, and then a reading group. The Hungry Caterpillar was a huge success, and the children left to change for gym in their respective changing rooms. I wandered outside. It was pretty chilly, and I was just debating whether or not to hold the class indoors when I heard it. A hollow rattling noise. "Hello?" I called. There was no reply, but I followed the sound to the playground gate, which backed onto the main road out of town. There was a little doll tied to the bars. I regarded it for a moment, a slightly misshapen object with a wool body and a face made from some kind of white ceramic material. A tangle of gaudy yellow thread was attached to its head, and the face had a disturbingly vacant, gap-toothed smile. The face of little Gavin Lewis came to mind, and I unhooked the doll from its string gibbet. It felt odd as I turned it over in my hands, heavier than it should have been, and solid beneath the soft exterior. I took it back to the empty classroom and examined it further. There was a seam up the back which seemed deliberately loose. I tugged at it, and the doll just fell apart in my hands. Bones, small and dry, spilled out onto my desk with a clatter which echoed the noise of running feet outside the door. I pulled my jacket over the mess just as the classroom was suddenly filled with excited children ready to play outside. My heart was pounding, and despite the cold day, I realized that I was sweating. What the fuck had I just found? "Alright, kids," I shouted. "We're gonna have gym inside today, alright?" This was met with a chorus of disappointed groans, but no objections, and they filed through into the gym hall. I arranged for one of the other teachers to keep an eye on the class, then hurried to the staff room. I found the number for Gavin's parents in the school's register and dialed it. No answer. I left an urgent request for his mother to contact me, then went to tell the headmistress. I showed her the bones and she went white. "Are they human?" she asked. I told her I had no idea. After a moment's deliberation, we phoned the police. The first officer to enter the room recoiled at the sight.
"Lord above!"
he cried. His colleague turned one of the larger ones over in his hands.
"They're chicken bones,"
he told us. I asked him if he was sure, and he told me that he'd grown up on a farm and was therefore well acquainted with animal bones. "What happens now?" asked the headmistress.
"It's obvious that this is some kind of threat, or at the very least, a sick joke."
The men gathered up the remains of the doll and took some of Gavin's records. I was assured that they would keep an eye on this school. True to their word, another patrol car pulled up outside the gates just as the first one left. Strangely enough, the rest of that day was fairly normal. The kids cottoned on to the mute horror being displayed by their teachers, but aside from a general air of nervousness, the schedule proceeded as normal. Eventually, the school day ended and parents, unaware of the eerie happenings, arrived en masse to collect their children. Those left caught the bus home. We did our best to make sure that everyone got away okay, but were wary about telling anyone what had happened. We didn't want to panic, especially when we didn't know what was going on yet. I was told that the police would call me in the morning to take a statement, and that I should go home. The next morning, I checked my phone, but there was nothing from the police. I suppose I wasn't really surprised. This was 1998, post-Stephen Lawrence inquiry. So the police's reputation throughout the UK was at an all-time low. Such an oversight was definitely possible in my book. I waited for an hour, but figured that if they desperately needed to contact me, they could phone the school. I arrived a little later than usual, actually meeting some of the children as their parents dropped them off. This, coupled with the patrol car now parked on the corner, reassured me for a time. It took me 15 minutes to realize that the bus had not arrived. The playground was almost empty in comparison with the previous day. I put the few kids present to work on some story writing and phoned the bus company. No, they hadn't heard from the driver. Probably just caught in traffic on his way through the next town along. Yeah, right. I felt ill. Something awful had happened to those children. The crushing pain of guilt hit me then. I should have warned the parents the day before. I needed air, and I stumbled into the playground. I heard it then. The faint rattling sound. I can only describe it as that of a bead curtain swaying in the wind. On autopilot, nausea forgotten, I wandered to the gate. Along the fence, in neat rows of identical gibbets, hung 32 little dolls. I didn't need to look at the register. I've always been good with faces. The children smiling up at me from their desks the day before were smiling at me now, faces frozen in an elation. There was something off about their eyes, though, painted in detail on the ceramic heads. The eyes told a different story. Fear, pain, and anguish registered in their expressions. Everything is a bit of a blur after that. I remember hammering on the window of the police car outside. It was about then that I saw the dolls inside, slightly larger than the child dolls, and dressed in immaculate little police uniforms complete with crude yet shiny epaulets. I slammed the classroom door behind me, and no longer caring whether the children knew something was up, began to cry. The fuck had I done to deserve this? must have passed out at some point because I woke up on the beanbags in the reading room with the doctor taking my pulse. I tried to speak, but my voice was a hoarse whisper. The man reassured me that the children had been taken home and that the school was closed. More patrol cars were arriving by that time. They rolled out the crime scene tape, and I think I heard a helicopter going by. I was obviously in no fit state to give an interview, but I managed to tell them everything I knew before I was taken to a hospital to be treated for shock. As they escorted me to a waiting ambulance, a reporter shoved a camera in my face and tried to take a photo. Policeman shoved him back as he did so, and I was shut inside the vehicle away from prying eyes. That almost concludes my part in this story. I quit my job and didn't leave my house for weeks following the incident. With one exception. It was raining, and the fog outside seemed to have all but been washed away. I was listening to the local radio station where they began to jabber about a supposedly important update in the missing children case. Hikers had found the school bus, empty but intact, partway up a nearby mountain. Police were said to have closed off a nearby farmhouse and barn and weren't letting anyone through. Needless to say, I made my way up to the house. The area was heavy with reporters, and even as I parked, TV crews were setting up for the midday news bulletins. Another thing I noticed were the chickens. Several hundred at least, roaming apparently wild all over the compound. A uniformed officer abruptly halted my advance, blocking the garden gate. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed forensics teams moving into the house. The hell had they found in there?
Sorry, mate. Crime scene. You're not allowed in.
Please, I said. You don't understand. I need to know what happened.
We'll tell the press in good time, but for now I'm gonna need you to get back to the cars.
I went home, but kept the television on. For most of the day, they just repeated the same arbitrary details. House was unoccupied, no arrests had been made, and the like. That evening, however, things changed. They played a short clip, which looked to have been shot from a mobile phone, allegedly leaked footage. The cameraman is standing in a narrow hallway, which ends with a downward staircase. He then descends into the darkness, and for a moment, it looks as though the clip has ended on a black screen. Suddenly, a dim electric light snaps on and reveals a basement area with damp stone walls, floor, and ceiling. He pauses and lets the camera pan over the area. The entire room is filled with strings of what appear to be white beads on strings, as tall as the wall. Camera zooms in, and the beads become bones. But these aren't just chicken bones. They're not broken up into fragments like the bones in the dolls. It's clear what they are, and I suppress the urge to vomit. Finger bones. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of tiny finger bones, dangling from strings like a macabre curtain. The cameraman mumbles some horrified curse, and the video ends abruptly. I went up there the other week. I just got your email asking to do the interview, and it got me thinking. It's been so many years, and I wanted to see for myself. I know it's breaking and entering, but come on, I had to know what it was like. Perhaps the police missed something. They never caught anyone, and nobody ever found the rest of the remains. So in a way, I was helping the investigation. Not like anyone goes up there anymore. The boards across the doorframe were rotten though, and it was fairly easy to crowbar my way inside. They cut the power a few months after it happened, so I had to rely on my torch, which narrowed my search considerably. I did find something, though. I'm guessing that they never searched that coal shed behind the house. It's another cellar area cramped and containing just a workbench and a few barrels of chicken feed. I pried one of them open and poked at the stuff inside with my crowbar. Ordinary feed mixed with a powdery white substance. I glanced over at the desk, at which sat a mortar and pestle. Inside, what appeared to be a half-ground bone, though human or chicken, I could not say. I was about to leave and to run to the authorities when I saw the files under the workbench. Generic plastic sleeves for keeping documents safe from the elements. They were dated one every 5 years, with the earliest being in the mid-1970s and the latest being dated in the 90s. I flipped the latter open and tipped its contents onto the tabletop. Photographs. Photographs of children in a playground, apparently taken from inside a car. Near the back of the pile, there was a picture of 2 police officers in a patrol car, oblivious to the presence of the photographer. The final picture. The final picture was of me. Not just any picture, though. I remembered exactly where I was when it was taken, blurred by movement and partially obscured by the hand of a police officer shoving the photographer away. I could just about make out myself being bundled into the ambulance. There was one other object in the folder. A doll. It was only half finished. The face had not yet been completed, and one of the arms had not yet been fully attached. The resemblance was uncanny. However, everything was familiar, from the brown suit right down to the stupid teddy boy hairstyle which I had in the 90s. The doll was me. No, not at all. I was glad to help. I guess sometimes we get over events by reliving them enough times. I just hope I don't get in trouble for the break-in part. You won't publish that, right? Good. What's that? A fresh photograph of me. Sure, yeah. Go ahead. Sunday. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down on paper and not on my computer. I guess I've just noticed some odd things. It's not that I don't trust the computer. I just need to organize my thoughts. I need to get down all the details somewhere objective. Somewhere I know that what I write can't be deleted or changed. Nor that that's happened. It's just everything blurs together here, and the fog of memory leads a strange cast to things. I'm starting to feel cramped in this small apartment. Maybe that's the problem. I just had to go and choose the cheapest apartment, the only one in the basement. The lack of windows down here makes day and night seem to slip by seamlessly. I haven't been out in a few days because I've been working on this programming project so intensively. I suppose I just wanted to get it done. Hours of sitting and staring at a monitor can make anyone feel strange. I know, but I don't think that's it. I'm not sure when I first started to feel like something was odd. I can't even define what it is. Maybe I just haven't talked to anyone in a while. That's the first thing that crept up on me. Everyone I normally talk to online while I program has been idle, or they simply not logged on at all. Instant messages go unanswered. The last email I got from anybody was a friend saying he'd talk to me when he got back from the store. That was yesterday. I'd call with my cell phone, but reception's terrible down here. Yeah, that's it. I just need to call someone. Gonna go outside. Well, that didn't work so well. As the tingle of fear fades, I'm feeling a little ridiculous for being scared at all. I looked in the mirror before I went out, but I didn't shave the 2-day stubble I've grown. I figured I was just going out for a quick cell phone call. Did change my shirt though, because it was lunchtime, and I guessed that I'd run into at least one person I knew. Didn't end up happening. Wish it did. When I went out, I opened the door to my small apartment slowly. A small feeling of apprehension had somehow already lodged itself in me, for some indefinable reason. I chalked it up to having not spoken to anyone but myself for a day or two. I peered down the dingy gray hallway, made dingier by the fact it was a basement hallway. On one end, a large metal door led to the building's furnace room. It was locked, of course. 2 dreary soda machines stood by it. I bought a soda from one the first day I moved in, but it had a 2-year-old expiration date. I'm fairly sure nobody knows those machines are even down here. My cheap landlady just doesn't care to get them restocked. I closed my door softly and walked in the other direction, taking care not to make a sound. I have no idea why I chose to do that, but it was fun giving in to the strange impulse not to break the droning hum of the soda machines, at least for the moment. I got to the stairwell and took the stairs up to the building's front door. I looked through the heavy door's small square window and received quite the shock. It was definitely not lunchtime. City gloom hung over the dark street outside, and the traffic lights at the intersection in the distance blinked yellow. Dim clouds, purple and black from the glow of the city, hung overhead. Nothing moved, save the few sidewalk trees that shifted in the wind. I remember shivering, though I wasn't cold. Maybe it was the wind outside. I could vaguely hear it through the heavy metal door, and I knew it was that unique kind of late-night wind, the kind that was constant, cold, and quiet, save for the rhythmic music it made as it passed through countless unseen tree leaves. I decided not to go outside. Instead, I lifted my cell phone to the door's little window and checked the signal meter. The bars filled up the meter, and I smiled. Time to hear someone else's voice, I remember thinking, relieved. It was such a strange thing to be afraid of nothing. I shook my head, laughing at myself silently. I hit speed dial for my best friend Amy's number and held the phone up to my ear. It rang once, but then it stopped. Nothing happened. I listened to silence for a good 20 seconds, then hung up. I frowned and looked at the signal meter again, still full. I went to dial her number again, but then my phone rang in my head, startling me. Put it up to my ear. "Hello?" I asked, immediately fighting down a small shock at hearing the first spoken voice in days, even if it was my own. I had gotten used to the droning hum of the building's inner workings, my computer, and the soda machines in the hallway. There was no response to my greeting at first, but then, finally, a voice came.
"Hey,"
said a clear male voice, obviously of college age like me.
"Who's this?"
"John," I replied, confused.
"Oh, sorry. Wrong number,"
he replied, then hung up. I lowered the phone slowly and leaned against the thick brick wall of the stairwell. That was strange. I looked at my received calls list, but the number was unfamiliar. Before I could think on it further, the phone rang loudly, shocking me yet again. This time I looked at the caller before I answered. Another unfamiliar number. This time I held the phone up to my ear, but said nothing. I heard nothing but the general background noise of a phone. Then, a familiar voice broke my tension. "John?" was the single word, in Amy's voice. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, it's you," I replied. "Who else would it be?" she responded. "Oh, the number. I'm at a party on 7th Street, and my phone died just as you called me. Somebody else's phone." "Oh, okay," I said. "Where are you?" she asked. My eyes glanced over the drab whitewashed cinder block walls and the heavy metal door with its small window. "At my building," I sighed, just feeling cooped up. I didn't realize it was so late. "You should come here," she said, laughing. "Nah, I don't feel like looking for some strange place by myself in the middle of the night," I said, looking out the window at the silent, windy street that secretly scared me just a tiny bit. "I think I'm just gonna keep working or go to bed." "Nonsense," she replied. "I can come get you. Your building is close to 7th Street, right?" "How drunk are you?" I asked lightheartedly. "You know where I live." "Oh, of course," she said abruptly. "I guess I can't get there by walking, huh?" "You could if you wanted to waste half an hour," I told her. "Right," she said. "All right, well, I gotta go. Good luck with your work." I lowered the phone once more, looking at the numbers flash as the call ended. Then, the droning silence suddenly reasserted itself in my ears. The two strange calls in the eerie street outside just drove home my aloneness in this empty stairwell. Perhaps from having seen too many scary movies, I had the sudden inexplicable idea that something could look in the door's window and see me. Some sort of horrible entity that hovered at the edge of aloneness, just waiting to creep on unsuspecting people that strayed too far from other human beings. I knew the fear was irrational, but nobody else was around, so I jumped down the stairs, ran down the hallway into my room, and closed the door as swiftly as I could while still staying silent. Like I said, I feel a little ridiculous for being scared of nothing, and the fear has already faded. Writing this down helps a lot. Makes me realize that nothing is wrong. It filters out half-formed thoughts and fears and leaves only cold, hard facts. It's late. I got a call from a wrong number, and Amy's phone died, so she called me back from another number. Nothing strange is happening. Still, there was something a little off about that conversation. I know it could have been the alcohol she'd had. Or was it even her that seemed off to me? Or was it... Yes, that was it. I didn't realize until this moment writing these things down. I knew writing things down would help. She said she was at a party, but I only heard silence in the background. Of course, that doesn't mean anything in particular, as she could have just gone outside to make the call. No, that couldn't be it either. I didn't hear the wind. I need to see if the wind is still blowing. Monday. I forgot to finish writing last night. I'm not sure what I expected to see when I ran up the stairwell and looked out the heavy metal door's window. I'm feeling ridiculous. Last night's fear seems hazy and unreasonable to me now. Can't wait to go out into the sunlight. Gonna check my email, shave, shower, and finally get out of here. Wait. I think I heard something. It was thunder. That old sunlight and fresh air thing didn't fucking happen. I went out to the stairwell and up the stairs, only to find disappointment. The heavy metal door's little window showed only flowing water as torrential rain slammed against it. Only a very dim, gloomy light filtered in through the rain, but at least I knew it was daytime, even if it was a gray, sickly, wet day. I tried looking out the window and waiting for lightning to illuminate the gloom. But the rain was too heavy, and I couldn't make out anything more than vague, weird shapes moving at odd angles in the waves, washing down the window. Disappointed, I turned around, but I didn't want to go back to my room. Instead, I wandered further up the stairs, past the first floor and the second. The stairs ended at the third floor, the highest floor in the building. I looked through the glass that ran up the outer wall of the stairwell, but it was that warped, thick kind that scatters the light. Not that there was much to see through the rain to begin with. I opened the stairwell door and wandered down the hallway. The 10 or so thick wooden doors painted blue a long time ago were all closed. I listened as I walked, but it was the middle of the day, so I wasn't surprised that I heard nothing but the rain outside. As I stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the rain, I had this strange fleeting impression that the doors were standing like silent granite monoliths, erected by some ancient forgotten civilization for some unfathomable guardian purpose. Lightning flashed, and I could have sworn that for just a moment the old grainy blue wood looked just like rough stone. I laughed at myself for letting my imagination get the best of me, but then it occurred to me that the dim gloom and lightning must mean there was a window somewhere in the hallway. A vague memory surfaced, and I suddenly recalled that the third floor had an alcove and an inset window halfway down the floor's hallway. Excited to look out into the rain and possibly see another human being, I quickly walked over to the alcove, finding the large thin glass window. Rain washed down it, as with the front door's window, but I could open this one. I reached a hand out to slide it open, but hesitated. I had the strangest feeling that if I opened that window, I would see something absolutely horrifying on the other side. Everything's been so odd lately, so I came up with a plan, and I came back here to get what I needed. I don't seriously think anything will come of it, but I'm bored, it's raining, and I'm going stir crazy. I came back to get my webcam. The cord isn't long enough to reach the third floor by any means, so instead I'm going to hide it between the 2 soda machines in the dark end of my basement hallway, run the wire along the wall and under my door, and put black duct tape over the wire to blend it in with the black plastic strip that runs along the base of the hallway's walls. I know this is silly, but I don't have anything better to do. Well, nothing happened. I propped open the hallway to stairwell door, steeled myself, then flung the heavy front door wide open and ran like hell down the stairs to my room and slammed the door. I watched the webcam on my computer intently, seeing the hallway outside my door and most of the stairwell. I'm watching it right now, and I don't see anything interesting. I just wish the camera's position was different, so that I could see out the front door. Oh, hey, somebody's online. I got out an older, less functional webcam that I had in my closet to video chat with my friend online. I couldn't really explain to him why I wanted to video chat, but it felt good to see another person's face. Couldn't talk very long, and we didn't talk about anything meaningful, but I feel much better. My strange fear had almost passed. I would feel completely better, but there was something odd about our conversation. I know that I've said everything has seemed odd, but still, he was very vague in his responses. I can't recall one specific thing that he said. No particular name, place, or event. But he did ask for my email address to keep in touch. Wait, I just got an email. I'm about to go out. I just got an email from Amy that asked me to meet her for dinner at the place we usually go to. I do love pizza, and I've just been eating random food from my poorly stocked fridge for days, so I can't wait. Again, I feel ridiculous about the odd couple of days I've been having. I should just destroy this journal when I get back. Oh, another email. Oh my God. I almost left the email and opened the door. I almost opened the door, but I read the email first. It was from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long time, and it was sent to a huge number of emails that must have been every person he had saved in his address list. It had no subject, and it said simply, "Seen with your own eyes. Don't trust them, they." What the hell is that supposed to mean? The words shock me, and I keep going over and over them. Is it a desperate email sent just as something happened? The words are obviously cut off without finishing. On any other day, I would have dismissed this as a spam from a computer virus or something. But the words, "Seen with your own eyes." I can't help but read over this journal and think back on the last few days and realize that I have not seen another person with my own eyes or talked to another person face to face. The webcam conversation with my friend was so strange, so vague, so eerie, now that I think about it. Was it eerie? Or was the fear clouding my memory? My mind toys with the progression of events I've written here, pointing out that I have not been presented with one single fact that I did not specifically give out unsuspectingly. The random wrong number that got my name and the subsequent strange return call from Amy, the friend that asked me for my email address. I messaged him first when I saw him online, and then I got my first email a few minutes after that conversation. "Oh my God, that phone call with Amy," I said over the phone. I said that I was within half an hour's walk of 7th Street. They know I'm near there. What if they're trying to find me? Where is everyone else? Why haven't I seen or heard anyone else in days? No, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. I need to calm down. This madness needs to end. I don't know what to think anymore. I ran about my apartment furiously, holding my cell phone up to every corner to see if it got a signal through the heavy walls. Finally, in the tiny bathroom near one ceiling corner, I got a single bar. Holding my phone there, I sent a text message to every number in my list. Not wanting to betray anything about my unfounded fears, I simply sent, "You see anyone face to face lately?" At that point, I just wanted any reply back. I didn't care what the reply was, or if I embarrassed myself. I tried to call someone a few times, but I couldn't get my head up high enough. And if I brought my cell phone down even an inch, it lost signal. Then I remembered the computer and rushed over to it, instant messaging everyone online. Most were idle or away from their computer. Nobody responded. My messages grew more frantic, and I started telling people where I was and to stop by in person for a host of barely passable reasons. I didn't care about anything by that point. I just needed to see another person. I also tore apart my apartment looking for something that I might have missed, some way to contact another human being without opening the door. I know it's crazy, I know it's unfounded, but what if I just need to be sure? I taped the phone to the ceiling, just in case. Tuesday. The phone rang! Exhausted from last night's rampage, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up to the phone ringing and ran into the bathroom, stood on the toilet, and flipped open the phone taped to the ceiling. It was Amy, and I feel so much better. She was really worried about me and apparently had been trying to contact me since the last time I talked to her. She's coming over now, and yes, she knows where I am without me telling her. I feel so embarrassed. I'm definitely throwing this journal away before anyone sees it. I don't even know why I'm writing it now. Maybe it's just because it's the only communication I've had at all since, God knows when. I look like hell, too. I looked in the mirror before I came back in here. My eyes are sunken, my stubble is thicker, and I just look generally unhealthy. My apartment is trashed, but I'm not gonna clean it up. I think I need someone else to see what I've been through. These past few days have not been normal. Not one to imagine things. I know I've been the victim of extreme probability. I probably missed seeing another person a dozen times. I just happened to go out when it was late at night, or the middle of the day when everyone was gone. Everything's perfectly fine. I know this now. Plus, I found something in the closet last night that has helped me tremendously. A TV. I set it up just before I wrote this, and it's on in the background. TV has always been an escape for me, and it reminds me that there's a world beyond these dingy brick walls. I'm so glad Amy's the only one that responded to me after last night's frantic pestering of everyone I could contact. She's been my best friend for years. She doesn't know it, but I count the day that I met her among one of the few moments of true happiness in my life. I remember the warm summer day fondly. It seems a different reality from this dark, rainy, lonely place. I feel like I spent days sitting in that playground, much too old to play, just talking with her and hanging around doing nothing at all. I still feel like I can go back to the moment sometimes, and it reminds me that this damn place is not all that there is. Finally, a knock on the door. I thought it was odd that I couldn't see her through the camera I hid between the two soda machines. I figured that it was bad positioning, like when I couldn't see out the front door. I should have known. After the knock, I yelled through the door jokingly that I had a camera between the soda machines, because I was embarrassed myself that I had taken this paranoia so far. After I did that, I saw her image walk over to the camera and look down at it. She smiled and waved. "Hey," she said to the camera brightly, giving it a wry look. "It's weird, I know," I said into the mic attached to my computer. "I've had a weird few days." "Must have," she replied. "Open the door, John." I hesitated. How could I be sure? "Hey, humor me a second here," I told her through the mic. "Tell me one thing about us just to prove to me you're you." She gave the camera a weird look. Okay," she said slowly, thinking. "We met randomly at a playground when we were both way too old to be there." I sighed deeply as reality returned and fear faded. God, I'd been so fucking ridiculous. Of course it was Amy. That day wasn't anywhere in the world except in my memory. I'd never even mentioned it to anyone, not out of embarrassment, but out of a strange secret nostalgia and a longing for those days to return. If there was some unknown force at work trying to trick me, as I feared, there was no way they could know about that day. Alright, I'll explain everything, I told her. Be right there. I ran to my small bathroom and fixed my hair as best I could. I looked like hell, but she would understand. Snickering at my own unbelievable behavior and the mess I'd made of the place, I walked to the door. I put my hand on the doorknob and gave the mess one last look. So ridiculous, I thought. My eyes traced over the half-eaten food lying on the ground, the overflowing trash bin, and the bed I'd tipped to the side looking for God knows what. I almost turned to the door and opened it, but my eyes fell on one last thing. The old webcam. The one I used for that eerily vacant chat with my friend. Its silent black spear lay haphazardly tossed to the side, its lens pointed at the table where this journal lay. An overwhelming terror took me as I realized that if something could see through that camera, it would have seen what I just wrote about that day. I asked her for any one thing about us, and she chose the only thing in the world that I thought they, or it, did not know. But it did! It did know! It could have been watching me the whole time! I didn't open the door. I screamed. I screamed in uncontrollable terror. I stomped on the old webcam on the floor. The door shook, and the doorknob tried to turn, but I didn't hear Amy's voice through the door. Was the basement door made to keep out drafts too thick, or was Amy not outside? What could have been trying to get in, if not her? What the hell is out there? I saw her on my computer through the camera outside. I heard her on the speakers through the camera outside. But was it real? How can I know? She's gone now. I screamed and shouted for help. I piled up everything in my apartment against the front door. Friday. At least I think that it's Friday. I broke everything electronic. I smashed my computer to pieces. Every single thing on there could have been accessed by network access, or worse, altered. I'm a programmer. I know. Every little piece of information I gave out since this started, my name, my email, my location, none of it came back from outside until I gave it out. I've been going over and over what I wrote. I've been pacing back and forth, alternating between stark terror and overpowering disbelief. Sometimes I'm absolutely certain some phantom entity is dead set on the simple goal of getting me to go outside. Back to the beginning with the phone call from Amy. She was effectively asking me to open the door and go outside. I keep running through it in my head. One point of view says I've acted like a madman, and all of this is the extreme convergence of probability. Never going outside at the right times by pure luck, never seeing another person by pure chance, getting a random nonsense email from some computer virus at just the right time. The other point of view says that extreme convergence of probability is the reason that whatever's out there hasn't gotten me already. I keep thinking, I never opened the window on the 3rd floor. I never opened the front door until that incredibly stupid stunt with the hidden camera, after which I ran straight to my room and slammed the door. I haven't opened my own solid door since I flung open the front door of the building. Whatever's out there, if anything's out there, never made an appearance in the building before I opened the front door. Maybe the reason it wasn't in the building already was that it was elsewhere getting everyone else, and then it waited until I betrayed my existence by trying to call Amy, a call which didn't work, until it called me and asked me my name. Terror literally overwhelms me every time I try to fit the pieces of this nightmare together. That email, short, cut off, was it from someone trying to get the word out? Some friendly voice desperately trying to warn me before it came? I seen it with my own eyes, don't trust them. Exactly what I've been so suspicious of. It could have been masterful control of all things electronic, practicing its insidious deception to trick me into coming outside. Why can't it get in? It knocked on the door. It must have some solid presence. The door. The image of those doors in the upper hallway as guardian monoliths flashes back in my mind every time I trace this path of thoughts. If there is some phantom entity trying to get me to go outside, maybe it can't get through doors. I keep thinking back over all the books I've read or movies I've seen, trying to generate some explanation for this. Doors have always been such intense foci of human imagination, always seen as wards or portals of special importance, or perhaps the door is just too thick. I know that I couldn't bash through any of the doors in this building, let alone the heavy basement ones. Aside from that, the real question is, why does it even want me, but just wanted to kill me? It could do it any number of ways, including just waiting until I starve to death. What if it doesn't want to kill me? What if it has some far more horrific fate in store for me? God, what can I do to escape this nightmare? A knock on the door. I told the people on the other side of the door I need a minute to think, and I'll come out. I'm really just writing this down so I can figure out what to do. At least this time I heard their voices. My paranoia, and yes, I recognize I'm being paranoid. It has me thinking all sorts of ways that their voices could be faked electronically. There could be nothing but speakers outside simulating human voices. Did it really take them 3 days to come talk to me? Amy is supposedly out there, along with 2 policemen and a psychiatrist. Maybe it took them 3 days to think of what to say to me. The psychiatrist's claim could be pretty convincing if I decided to think that this has all been a crazy misunderstanding, and not some entity trying to trick me into opening the door. The psychiatrist had an older voice, authoritarian but still caring. I liked it. I'm desperate just to see someone with my own eyes. He said I have something called psychosis, and I'm just one of a nationwide epidemic of thousands of people having breakdowns triggered by a suggestive email that got through somehow. I swear he said, got through somehow. I think he meant spread throughout the country inexplicably, but I'm incredibly suspicious that the entity slipped up and revealed something. He said I'm part of a wave of emergent behavior, that a lot of other people are having the same problem with the same fears, even though we've never communicated. That neatly explains the strange email about eyes that I got. I didn't get the original triggering email. I got a descendant of it. My friend could have broken down too, and tried to warn everyone he knew against his paranoid fears. That's how the problem spreads. The psychiatrist claims I could have spread it too, with my texts and instant messages online to everybody I know. One of those people might be melting down right now after being triggered by something I sent them. Something they might interpret any way that they want. Something like a text saying, "Seen anyone face to face lately?" The psychiatrist told me that he didn't want to lose another one, that people like me are intelligent, and that's our downfall. We draw connections so well that we draw them even when they shouldn't be there. He said it's easy to get caught up in paranoia in our fast-paced world, a constantly changing place where more and more of our interaction is simulated. I have to give him one thing. It's a great explanation. It neatly explains everything. It perfectly explains everything, in fact. I have every reason to shake off this nightmarish fear that something or consciousness or being out there wants me to open the door so it can capture me for some horrible fate worse than death. It would be foolish, after hearing that explanation, to stay in here until I starve to death, just to spite the entity that might have got everyone else. It would be foolish to think that after hearing that explanation, I might be one of the last people left alive on an empty world, hiding in my secure basement room, spiting some unthinkable deceptive entity just by refusing to be captured. It's a perfect explanation for every single strange thing I've seen or heard, and I have every reason in the world to let all my fears go and open that door. That's exactly why I'm not going to. How can I be sure? How can I know what's real and what's deception? All of these damn things with their wires and their signals that originate from some unseen origin. They're not real. I can't be sure. Signals through a camera, faked video, deceptive phone calls, emails, even the television lying broken on the floor. How can I possibly know it's real? It's just signals, waves, lights, the door. It's bashing on the door. It's trying to get in. What insane mechanical contrivance could it be using to simulate the sound of men attacking the heavy wood so well? At least I'll finally see it with my own eyes. There's nothing left in here to deceive me with. I've ripped apart everything else. It can't deceive my eyes, can it? Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, Wait. Was that desperate message telling me to trust my eyes, or warning me about my eyes too? Oh my god, what's the difference between a camera and my eyes? They both turn light into electrical signals. They're the same. I can't be deceived. I have to be sure. I have to be sure. Dates unknown. I calmly asked for a paper and a pen, day in and day out, until it finally gave them to me. Not that it matters. What am I gonna do? Poke my eyes out? The bandages feel like a part of me now. Pain is gone. I figured this will be one of my last chances to write legibly, as without my sight to correct mistakes, my hands will slowly forget the motions involved. This is a sort of self-indulgence, this writing. It's a relic of another time, because I'm certain everyone left in the world is dead, or something far worse. I sit against the padded wall day in and day out. The entity brings me food and water. It masks itself as a kind nurse, as an unsympathetic doctor. I think it knows that my hearing has sharpened considerably now that I live in darkness. It fakes conversations in the hallways on the off chance that I might overhear. One of the nurses talks about having a baby soon. One of the doctors lost his wife in a car accident. None of it matters. None of it is real. None of it gets to me. Not like she does. That's the worst part. The part I almost can't handle. The thing comes to me, masquerading as Amy. Its recreation is perfect. It sounds exactly like Amy, feels exactly like her. It even produces a reasonable facsimile of tears that it makes me feel on its lifelike cheeks. When it first dragged me here, it told me all the things I wanted to hear. It told me that she loved me, that she had always loved me, that it didn't understand why I did this, that we could still have a life together if only I would stop insisting that I was being deceived. It wanted me to believe. No, It needed me to believe that she was real. I almost fell for it. I really did. I doubted myself for the longest time. In the end, though, it was all too perfect, too flawless, and too real. The false Amy used to come every day, and then every week, and finally stopped coming altogether. But I don't think the entity will give up. I think the waiting game is just another one of its gambits. I will resist it for the rest of my life if I have to. I don't know what happened to the rest of the world, but I do know that this thing needs me to fall for its deceptions. If it needs that, then maybe, just maybe, I'm a thorn in its agenda. Maybe Amy is still alive out there somewhere, kept alive only by my will to resist the deceiver. I hold on to that hope, rocking back and forth in my cell to pass the time. I will never give in. I will never break. I am a hero. The doctor read the paper the patient had scribbled on. It was barely readable, written in the shaky script of one who could not see. He wanted to smile at the man's steadfast resolve, a reminder of the human will to survive. But he knew that the patient was completely delusional. After all, a sane man would have fallen for the deception long ago. The doctor wanted to smile. He wanted to whisper words of encouragement to the delusional man. He wanted to scream, but the nerve filaments wrapped around his head and into his eyes made him do otherwise. His body walked into the cell like a puppet and told the patient once more that he was wrong and that there was nobody trying to deceive him. I know the topic of scary, or rather disturbing stories from our childhoods are outdated and furthermore considered cliché, but I thought you might like this one. This one was from my high school years. I wasn't always rebellious. In fact, I was a pretty good kid. I wasn't what you would call an angel of a child, but I was still keeping up appearances, had good grades, was disciplined enough, and I had pretty well-developed manners. I hung out with this delinquent, Cody. He was an asshole, the biggest one you'll ever meet. Nobody really liked him, but he was quite wealthy, and while his parents were away, he would throw huge parties that half of the 10th grade students from my high school would go to. I was always invited to these, but he always started the parties late at night, around midnight. His last party did at least, which meant my parents wouldn't let me go, so I didn't even bother asking. I know it wasn't my nature, and now that I look back, it was a really stupid choice, but I decided I would sneak out. My dad stayed up till 11 every night and never emerged from his bedroom until the following morning, and my mom always slept till noon, using beauty sleep as an excuse. Time came. It was the night of the party. It was about 11:30, and my dad had already stumbled into his bedroom and proceeded to snore loudly. I slowly twisted the handle of my door to reveal the inky blackness of the hallways. Now would be the perfect time to escape. If not now, never. He lived pretty far away. It would take at least an hour to get there by foot. I softly closed my door and lightly paced towards our sliding glass door. I opened it slowly. It must have been a minute before there was an opening big enough for me to squeeze through. Once I was through, I took no risk and took another minute to close it again. I was outside, and the moon illuminated the ground quite well. I lived in the desert area, and there were really no threats at night, save for coyotes, but they rarely attack. I kept a pocket knife on me, however. They were usually more scared of you than you were of them, but this was just a precaution. You can't ever be too careful out here. There's also a fair amount of shady people for such a small town, but that didn't really worry me much. The terrain was rugged and quite difficult to navigate. I had to dodge tall brush and jump over eroded crevices in the earth. I checked my watch. It was around 12:15 and I knew I must be close, because I saw a familiar house that I always pass by while walking on the sidewalk to get to Cody's house. Only a couple more blocks and I would have made it. The terrain had gotten surprisingly less jagged and smoother after a couple minutes. The ground was mainly free of rocks and other obstructions save for beer bottles and some dried up bushes. But there was one thing that caught my eye. There was a brown torn tarp lying next to the side of the ditch I was walking through. I stopped for a moment and observed it, before my curiosity managed to claw its way through, and I slowly approached it. It was probably just trash, but for some reason, I felt inclined to see what it was. I nudged it with my foot, and a tall figure rose swiftly from under the cover. I was knocked back and frozen with fear. It was a bear-like creature that wore a dark brown trench coat and dusty brown pants. He was barefoot, and his feet were larger than any creature I know of. The bear-like creature stood up. He had to have stood higher than 6'5", towering over me. Long white hair protruded from every visible inch of body there was, almost like an animal. Its glossy eyes met mine, and I was ready to run. I managed to stutter out a few words. "Huh? What?" I stopped, examining the creature once more. "What are you?" The figure looked at me again and let out a loud, hearty chuckle. He wiped a few tears of joy from under his eyes and gave me a smile.
"Why, my boy, I am Mr. Trenchfoot,"
he said, still grinning at me. His tone was nothing short of friendly, and that was the only thing stopping me from making a mad dash back to my house. He gave me a puzzled look and asked,
"Do you by any chance know the date?"
I thought he was joking at first, and I laughed a bit, but then I saw his serious expression. I stuttered again, but managed to collect myself. It's June 7th, I said. He looked shocked, or rather intrigued. He looked at me again, and my eyes met his once more.
My, I've been asleep quite long. It was November last time I was awake,"
he said, still sounding jovial.
"Now tell me, what have I missed?"
We strangely got into a conversation. Lasted a good 15 minutes or so. He asked me about politics, celebrities, but nothing too serious. We spoke for a while. I looked down at my watch and noticed the time. I had about 16 minutes to get there before it hit 1. I sat up from the rock on which I was previously rested. "I have to get going," I said. Mr. Trenchfoot stood up and wiped dirt off his coat and coughed before speaking. He walked towards a storm drain that seemed to lead into blackness.
"Follow me,"
he said, entering it.
"I need to show you something."
His voice was all too friendly and inviting. He crawled farther into the pipe, and soon he was enveloped in darkness. I dared not enter, and stood there for a while. He turned, and the only reason I knew that is because the little bit of moonlight illuminated his eyes, just as it would a dog's or a cat's. I stepped back a bit, a little frightened, and reminded him I had to go.
"Come here,"
he said softly. He repeated, and each time he got more angered and menacing.
"Come here. Come here. Come here."
He inched forward, just enough so I could see him fully. Long black claws protruded from his fingers. He clawed the sides as he repeated,
"Come here now. Come here now."
I ran as fast as I could back up the ditch I was walking in, daring not to look back to see if he was following until I was at a safe distance. After about a minute of running, I looked back and was relieved he did not follow. He stood watching as the moon outlined his figure. I continued to run as fast as I think I've ever run. I hopped over my fence, this time not cautious of not making any noise, and I ran inside, tired and frightened. My dad heard my entrance and ran to see what the cause of the noise was. I explained something had tried to attack me, and he called the police without hesitation. I explained to the police where it happened and what I saw. They took no time to rush to the area and investigate. No sign of Mr. Trenchfoot. I was at the scene watching them at a safe distance with my mom and dad, and I had shown the chief the drain pipe that Mr. Trenchfoot had tried to lure me in. He took no time to motion several armed men inside. They didn't find him though, and they still haven't to this day. However, they did find something. They found Mr. Trenchfoot's tarpon there, still dusty as ever. There was no sign of Mr. Trenchfoot himself, or any life for that matter. There was another thing in the room. In the far corner of the dark, cold concrete shelter was a pile of bloody, torn clothes, all of them belonging to children in my town that went missing in the last 20 years.